Hello everybody, in this video we have a rather strange beat-em-up RPG hybrid that came out on the 3DS and several years later on Steam. It's Code of Princess, which on the 3DS came in a very nice packaging, a beautiful box art and a music CD, which also came in sort of a little, I guess you could call it an art book with some nice concept art. The game's manual was very beautiful and fully colored with, again, more concept art of the characters and some of the monsters. Overall, very beautiful packaging, and I am glad that I own this game retail for the 3DS. However, I think that the main character's, the princess's expression on the box art is a little dumb. Other than that, it's an absolutely gorgeous box art. Code of Princess is a weird game, and I couldn't say that I love it a lot, however I don't hate it either, so let's see what I have to say about the game and just what kind of a game this is. This game has one of the weirdest, most strangest ports I've ever seen. Basically, what we're looking at here is a direct port of the 3DS version. In fact, the game even runs at its default resolution and it's simply upscaled to fit 1080p or 720p, whatever it is you're running the game on. It's so weird that you can actually access the bottom screen of the DS and have both the top and bottom screens displayed at the same time by hitting F5. You cycle through different layouts for both screens. Since, however, the bottom screen doesn't really hold much information relevant to gameplay, you don't really need it. However, if you want to access your command list and see all the different moves you can pull off, you're gonna have to use the bottom screen and click the commands function with your mouse, which indicates that they didn't even bother to change the code for the game and make it, more controller friendly. I find it rather fascinating that they did this. It's almost as if the game is being emulated on PC, which I strongly doubt it actually is, but that's what the port feels like. But even though they did not improve on the visuals or controls, the port is actually very stable and very well made, and it improves on some performance issues that the 3DS game had. At first glance, Code of Princess is a regular old-school beat-em-up. However, that unfortunately is not the case. We're looking at a very weird game with rather strange controls that is part beat-em-up and part JRPG. This is the type of game that takes some getting used to, and unless you know what you're in for, you may end up hating the game. However, there is a good game underneath all that weirdness. It's just something that you need to accept for what it is and not complain about what the game is not. Even with that said, the game has its share of problems that I honestly have a hard time accepting. You see guys, I've said this before in other videos. Basically, in beat-em-ups and action games, I want the characters to feel like an extension of myself. Unfortunately, that is not the case with Code of Princess, because I always feel like, I don't know, instead of controlling my character directly, I feel that I'm giving them commands and waiting for them to execute said commands. Maybe I'm not that good at this game. Perhaps I don't know how to properly execute the several different moves we're given, or my timing isn't right. But even with that in mind, movement still doesn't feel natural enough, to me at least. And even when combat is going well, again, I don't feel like I am directly in control of my combat. In fact, it gets so bad at times that I feel like I'm playing a semi-turn-based game. Maybe that's the nature of the game, maybe it is not, but it's something to keep in mind. I don't know if this is a bad thing or not. Maybe some people enjoy this. Maybe it's just the way I feel about the game and it's not the case at all, as I said. However, that's the way it feels to me, and for me, it makes the game less enjoyable than it would have been had it used faster, more responsive, more intuitive controls. But this isn't something that you can get used to over time, and once you do, you realize that this game has a lot to offer. For one, it has a huge number of playable characters. Now, in the main story mode, you can only play with 4 of the characters. However, there's also free mode, which is basically the story battles minus the cutscenes, and here you can play with all sorts of different characters, from NPCs to monsters to some of the side characters, the other main characters that are not playable in the main story. So that is a lot of fun. Another thing that I like about this game, and which I don't know, some people dislike, but I think that it's absolutely perfect for a handheld game, because this is primarily a handheld game. We have to understand this. Each battle is very short. So basically battles take place in small arenas, and they do not last long. They each last for about a minute or 2, 3 minutes at most. And as you level up and as you get better, they last even less and less. Now, speaking of leveling up, the character you play as gains experience for completing each battle. I don't know if the amount of monsters you defeat in a battle matters. I don't think it does. I think that what matters is that you complete your objective. So if the battle says defeat the boss and you defeat the boss without defeating the other monsters in the area, I believe you still get the same amount of experience. There is more to the RPG mechanics of this game than just leveling characters up. Code of Princess has a rather basic equipment system where the player can equip different weapons, accessories, armor, each with their own stats and ability. Equipment can be found during battle or bought from a store. Now, the store holds a random selection of items, so it's good to check the store before each battle, because it always has something new. Another aspect of the gameplay that brings Code of Princess closer to RPGs is the enemy's behavior during battle. Now, at first, in early battles, this isn't very apparent, and enemies behave like they would in the at most basic beat-em-ups. However, as battles become more complex and more difficult, we see the enemies executing some moves and attacks that either boost their stats or reduce the player's stats. They can do area of effect attacks that even affect themselves. There are certain attacks that enemies can execute that negatively impact other enemies in the area as well. So if the player knows how to manipulate the battlefield, they can sometimes use the enemy's attacks against them, which is very interesting in my opinion. It's it adds another layer to the game's combat. However, and I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, and we're going back to the character leveling. It's very easy to over-level in this game and to become very strong. Now, I personally love this because I'm not a very skilled player, so the only way for me to overcome some difficulties in the game was to over-level. Fortunately, the game lets you do that in a very short amount of time. All you have to do is pick one of the bosses you feel most comfortable with that gives you sufficient experience, and you can just keep farming that same boss until you feel confident enough to go back and face whatever challenge was giving you trouble. Keep in mind that even if you are over-leveled, if you don't understand the combat system, one wrong move can and will turn the tide of battle, and you will find yourself dying or dead, failing the quest or mission you were on. Even though there is a huge number of playable characters, each with their own abilities and attacks, they all control differently, which I find very fascinating. The core battle mechanics are the same for everybody. There's a weak and strong attack, there's a tag attack, which lets you lock onto enemies, and a so-called burst move, which amplifies all your other attacks, however, drains your mana while it's active. Understanding how to properly utilize and combine all these different moves and attacks, as well as different combos you can do, is key to being successful in combat. And this goes for all characters, regardless of whether they're NPCs, they're story characters, regardless of what their abilities or combat style is like. Overleveled for the story you may be, but story mode is simply preparation for what is to come. The real challenge, the real meat of the game lies in the bonus quests, and the bonus quests present some serious challenge even for highly leveled characters. In fact, you'll find yourself looking at the quest failed screen more often than the quest clear screen, because maybe, I don't know, maybe it was just me, maybe I'm not that good at this game. However, I found some of the later bonus quests very difficult. There are different missions here that you can do that are not found in the main story mode. We have defending NPCs from monsters, having to kill difficult to defeat enemies within a short amount of time, or, I don't know, defeating some very strong bosses. So even if you are overleveled for the story mode, and story mode, as I said, is merely a preparation for things to come, the real challenge of the game lies in these bonus quests, and I don't know, they're not for everybody, but I'm sure that hardcore players are bound to enjoy this mode of the game more. This, I will be honest, it wasn't for me. I prefer playing the easier quests. The bonus mode is just too difficult for my tastes. However, I respect the fact that it's there and that it provides sufficient challenge for hardcore players. Code of Princess wouldn't be an RPG and beat 'em up hybrid if it didn't have a nice little story to it. Now, the story isn't anything outstanding, and the characters are pretty much anime cliches we've seen before thousands of times. However, it's an enjoyable little story with cutscenes that happen to last longer than the actual battles themselves. Surprisingly enough, the story clears up what Code of Princess, the game's title, actually means, and it makes sense. I must admit, I did not expect it to do that when I got the game. I thought it was just one of those nonsense anime titles that we often see in Japanese animation or games. Speaking of the story, the voice acting is pretty good on the DS. We got English voice acting and, unfortunately, on Steam only Japanese voice acting. And while the voice acting is decent enough or good during the story sequences, in-game, during battle, it's absolutely atrocious, especially the Japanese one, where I have to hear the characters say the same phrases over and over to no end, and it just gets exceptionally irritating. There's this, the main character, Solange, I don't know how to even pronounce her name, has this annoying thing she says, like, she says, "Yamete," every goddamn time she gets hit. It's so infuriating to just listen to that over and over and over to no end. It really, at least for me, negatively impacts the enjoyment of the game. Fortunately, it's a game that I usually play with low volume because, it's a pick up and play game that I can just go through several battles while listening to something else, so it's not that big a deal, but it's there and it's annoying. On the other hand, the music in the game is very good, and that CD that came with the DS version is something that I'm sure people who are into video game music are going to make good use of. I personally don't listen to this type of music, so it's not for me, but it is music that I can respect. There are some good tracks on there. So overall, Code of Princess is a weird game. It's not your typical beat 'em up, but it is a nice pick up and play game as long as you know what you are in for. I recommend picking the game up during a sale on Steam. I would not personally go out of my way to recommend this game to somebody because it's not a conventional game. It's a game that some people may find difficult or confusing, and I know many people in real life who simply do not enjoy anything out of the norm, and I'm similar to that in some regard. For me, this game was well worth it, and it was well worth buying twice because, as I said, it's a pick up and play game. However, it's a strange game that I think it's best tried before buying, so if you know what you're in for, go ahead and buy the game and hopefully you will enjoy it.